Hi, I'm Stuart Malina, Music Director of the Greenwich Symphony Orchestra. Today I'm here to talk about the program that we're going to do on April 13th and 14th. This is our final concert weekend of the year. And if I had to come up with a name for this program, I suppose I could call it Music That Is Out of This World. Each of the pieces deals with phenomena that are not of the earth. And the first piece particularly, which is a piece that's aptly titled Musica, Celestis, or Music of the Heavens. This is by Aaron J. Kernis, a great American composer. And it was a piece that was originally written for string quartet, and then he adapted the piece for string orchestra. He thought that it would work particularly well with a larger force of string instruments. But the piece is just for strings. It was written in 1990 originally in its quartet form and expanded in 1992. The idea of Musica Celestis is that the angels are in heaven and they're singing without end in praise of God. And so the world that Kernis tries to set up is one of extreme expansiveness, one of extreme beauty and lyricism, and also one where excitement builds. And so it starts basically setting the scene, and this is done through chords in the various ranges of the strings that phase in and out over each other. Now, I can't really capture that on the piano, but I can give you a sense of what the tonal world of it is. So this is what the opening sounds like, sort of. And this continues for a little bit of time, and then he introduces the main theme of the piece. And he uses this theme somewhat like a passacaglia. A passacaglia is a form that goes back hundreds of years, and it's one of the earlier variation forms in music. So he'll give you a very simple theme, and then he'll use that theme continuing through the piece, sometimes as an inner voice, sometimes as a lower voice, sometimes as the main upper voice, but it will always be there as he gives slight variations that move the piece along. And in this particular case, that thicken the texture and build momentum and excitement. But the main theme is first presented in a very simple form in just the mid strings. So the second violins, violas, and cellos. And this is what it sounds like. And so on. Now, as this piece builds, and we have new reiterations of this theme, he'll sometimes include within the string section solo instruments. So the concertmaster, the principal first violin, will have solos. The viola gets the second iteration of the theme. The cello will have solos. And these create beautiful string textures within the texture of the large orchestra, because simply when you have a full section playing the same thing together, it has a richness and a broadness to the sound. And when you contrast that to just a single string instrument, it creates a beautiful contrast. So the piece, as I said, will build. I'm not going to play too much of it, but it gets extremely explosive at one point. And just at that point, when the passacaglia has reached its peak of excitement, things explode even further, and you have very fast-moving scales that go throughout the string section in canon with each other. So they're not always playing in unison, but rather they're playing staggered so that it creates beautiful chords as these scales rush up and down. All of this will come to a major climax with brilliantly strong and extremely highly pitched chords for the full string section, somewhat a la Barber's Adagio for strings, which has a similar climax. And in a similar sense to the Adagio for strings, things will then again come down in their energy. And it ends very much as it started, with these beautiful phasing in and out of the texture chords. Kernis talks about how this piece was deeply influenced by medieval music, and you hear that throughout, both in terms of the Passacaglia form, but also in terms of the simplicity of the harmonies and of the melodies, but also particularly by the compositions of Hildegard van Bingen, who was one of the great composers of the medieval age, and certainly one of the earliest great female composers in all of Western music. The second piece on our program is one of the most beloved pieces of French music in the entire repertoire. It's called Clair de Lune, or Moonlight, and it's by the great French composer Claude Debussy. Now, Debussy wrote a number of pieces called Clair de Lune. The first was a song in a set of songs based on poems by the poet Paul Verlaine. And the idea of these poems themselves are based on works of art by the artist Watteau. I'm not going to talk too much about the paintings or even about the poems, but these were very evocative to Debussy, which made him obviously want to write multiple versions of this poetry. You don't hear the poetry so much in this particular piece. The Clair de Lune is part of a suite that he wrote called the Suite Bergamasque, Bergamasque referring to the whole world of picaresque, which talks about characters like Harlequin and Columbine. These were very central to European culture. And again, not so crucially important in terms of this particular piece. What's important about this piece is the way that it paints a gorgeous picture of a simple moonlight evening. And it's based on a piano piece. It was not originally written for orchestra, and in fact, the orchestration was done after Debussy's death. But it's a piece that's been orchestrated many times, and the reason is that it's so incredibly beautiful and lends itself so beautifully to orchestral textures, both in terms of the strings, in terms of the harp playing beautiful arpeggios that are part of this piece, and the interplay between woodwinds as solo instruments and strings providing a more wide texture underneath. The piece is very familiar. I'll play just a little bit in case you don't recognize it. And it goes on. It's a truly spectacular piece. There is one part that I thought would be interesting just to talk a little bit about because it is so splendid. And it goes like this. I love this just because it's beautiful, but I also love the way it's constructed. He's basically using a third, and by extension an E-flat minor chord, and then having the melody just move on the outside of that. So the chord stays the same, the melody changes, and it creates this extremely beautiful moment. The piece continues, as I said, with sections where you have melody and arpeggiated accompaniment. Again, lending itself quite beautifully to the harp. In fact, I imagine that Debussy, when he wrote this piece, was trying to make the piano sound like a harp. At any rate, it's a very lyrical, very serene piece of music. It does have its climaxes, but the climaxes themselves are understated. It's a piece that tries to create a picture of utter serenity, beauty, and joy. The third piece and final piece on the first half of this program will be music by John Williams, the great writer of film music. One of America's true treasures in the music world. John Williams' career has been quite extraordinary, and he's written not just some of the great scores of all time for the movies, but he's also written works for the concert hall. He's been a spokesman for American music, just a great figure and one of the most talented men in the world of music in America. This piece was written in 1977 for the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. This was one of the earlier collaborations between Steven Spielberg and John Williams, and it tells the story of aliens coming to Earth. And they alert a small group of individuals. They get this cosmic message that this is going to happen and where to converge when they finally arrive. And whereas those people are filled with a sense of serenity and a sense of excitement and joy, everyone else who hears about it is filled with a sense of dread and terror, preparing for the worst. The music similarly has two aspects to it. You have music that's evocative of the strangeness of anything happening in outer space that we don't know about, the uncertainty on Earth, the fear, the dread of what was going to happen. And then on the other hand, you have this sense of sweeping joy and celebration and excitement and anticipation. The first part of the piece is the former of those, and John Williams sets up a world that sounds extremely atonal, very much out of the world of late 20th century classical music, with very strange sounds rumbling under the surface, bold interruptions in the brasses, no sense of melody, but just a sense of discomfort. And this will go on for a while, building in excitement until finally this stops and we're left with something much more serene, something much more beautiful. I'll play a little bit of that. You can hear suddenly the music gets quite beautiful. Emerging out of that comes the 5-note motive. Anyone who has seen the movie knows this motive. This is the motive. I mean, music being the universal language, and in fact, in this case, the galactic language. It's the only way that the aliens can communicate directly to the Earthlings and vice versa. And so you hear this in various iterations, but it will also make its appearance in this tone poem. The final bit that I'll play from this is a section of music, and it's, in my mind, clearly derived from When You Wish Upon a Star. The bridge of that goes like this. And similarly, there's a bridge section of sorts in this tone poem that John Williams created out of his music from Close Encounters that goes like this. Maybe I'm wrong, but I know that When You Wish Upon a Star plays a role in the movie, and so it seems a little bit too much a coincidence that he uses the contour of that beautiful bridge from the original song. This will build to a tremendous complex, listen to me, to a tremendous climax. And in that climax, you get John Williams at his full force. This was a man who knew how to use an orchestra and knew how to build drama in music. That's why he was such a tremendously successful film writer. And you hear all of that in this truly wonderful and fairly succinct excerpts from Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I do think it will be a very nice addition to this program and a perfect foil for the piece that comes after our intermission. The piece that will fill our second half of the program is Holst's masterpiece, The Planets. Gustav Holst was one of the great British composers of the early part of the 20th century. In fact, we are going to be celebrating his 150th birthday in September. I have to admit that had no part in my presenting this piece. Rather, I just think it's a wonderful piece of music and it's an audience favorite. It also fits this theme because it is about the heavenly bodies. Although the question is it really about the planets themselves? Not really. It is not about Mars, the planet. And in fact, it's not even so much about Mars, the mythological figure, but rather it reflects astrology. And Holst was a devotee to astrology. This happened not that much before he wrote this piece. In the early 1910s, he was turned on to astrology and he dove into it. And what he always said was that he was drawn to things that evoked music in his mind. And when he thought about astrology, about the astrological signs, about the personality traits that each of these astrological signs had, it made him think of music. And this, The Planets, was in fact the culmination of that whole idea. He wrote the piece in 1914, at least started in 1914, finished in 1917. This, of course, was during World War I. Most of the music of this period tended to be sad and depressing and intense. This is certainly an intense piece, but it's kind of the exception to the rule that music during war has to have that kind of a intensity to it. This is just a great piece of music that happened to have been written during wartime. The 7 movements are all based on the astrological signs that are the names of what at that point were the 7 planets. And each one has a character. So the first movement is Mars, the bringer of war. Now, I said earlier that I thought that it was appropriate to do the music of John Williams on this program. And indeed, a lot of people have said when they've heard scores by John Williams, oh my God, it sounds just like The Planets. Well, I think that John Williams would probably admit that he was deeply influenced by The Planets and by lots of other great composers that came before him. His music is original and it was synthesized out of a lot of different ideas, but there are certainly aspects of John Williams' music that come almost directly out of The Planets, both in terms of the way he orchestrated things and in terms of the way that he portrayed particular ideas. But it's not John Williams alone that has this. Pretty much anybody in the late 20th century, even into the 21st century, who writes a battle scene, particularly a battle scene in space, is going to evoke the music of Holst. It just seems to happen. So anyway, a couple of interesting things about Mars. The first is that it's set in 5/4 time, which means that there are going to be 5 beats for every measure. And it's a very famous rhythmic motive that you get at the very beginning with timpani, 2 harps, and the strings playing what we call col legno, which means with the wood. They take the wood of their bow and tap on the strings. So you'll hear along with the timpani. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That is going to be the pulse of virtually the entire movement. But he does something interesting. In addition to having music that is in 5/4, like the very beginning. That is clearly in 5/4 time. He'll also take two 5/4 measures and create a 5/2 time, meaning instead of 5 quarter notes, there will be 5 half notes. And this will sound like this. So in other words, you have, instead of two measures of 5 times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 1 and 2. So this is what it sounds like. See if you can hear that. And so there will be this struggle between those two ideas, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and. But because the slower of those is still made up of 2 5/4 measures, he doesn't have to change the pulse. You have this driving that goes all the way through. And so, I mean, I could talk so much about this piece, but those are the basic ideas. The idea of the ostinato rhythm and the idea of the struggle between 5/4 and 5/2. The second movement is Venus, the bringer of peace. And right from the very beginning, there couldn't be a greater contrast between war in the first movement and peace in the second. It begins with simply a solo French horn. And then it's answered by the addition of flutes and oboes. Quite lovely, and it really does set up a very different world of this piece. You're going to get long sections again of ostinato, and when I say ostinato, I mean a pattern that continues on in a repeated fashion. In this case, it's this kind of a sound. Very beautiful. Two harps are playing that rhythm constantly, along with woodwinds and brasses that join in and phase in and out. This also features a very beautiful melody that we'll first hear by the solo violin. So the concertmaster will play in solo. And that becomes kind of the secondary, most important theme of this beautiful slow movement. The third section is Mercury, the winged messenger. Mercury, of course, speedy delivery character in mythology. And the winged messenger is a very fleet movement. It goes by very quickly. There's some very interesting things about the way that he composes this piece. Right at the very beginning, you have this kind of emotion. And it creates a distinctive sound. So what is he doing? He's giving you successive chords, a B flat chord, and an E chord. Why is that so interesting? Well, harmonically, there are not further notes apart from each other than a tritone. That if you go through the circle of fifths, which is how you do modulation in standard Western harmony, you have to go. finally got anywhere near the B flat again. So he's going from B flat to E flat, B flat to E flat, B flat to E flat, and that will be the harmonic sound of this piece. The other thing that he does is similar to what we had in the first movement with Mars. In that movement, he had a 5/4 that alternated with a 5/2, which was made up of two 5/4 measures. In this particular movement, it's in 6/8 time. 6/8 time generally is going to be two sets of three, like you'll hear at the beginning. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But then he'll divide those same six beats into three sets of two. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3, and so it'll sound like this. So it'll go back and forth from this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Again, very similar to what we had in the first movement. There will be an important melody that comes about midway through the piece, and this will become somewhat of an ostinato melody in that it will repeat and repeat and repeat and repeat and build an energy. Hear this melody again and again, handed off from instrument to instrument as it builds until finally the whole orchestra is like. And you have the climax of the movement. It will end as it started, extremely softly. And there are a couple of orchestration things that he does that I think are worth mentioning. One is the use of the celesta. The celesta is the bell-like keyboard instrument that sounds an octave higher than the piano. It's the instrument that plays the beginning of the Mr. Rogers theme. It sounds like bells. It sounds like magic fairy tale land. And in this movement, he uses it quite beautifully in ways like this. So you'll hear that. The other thing that's very interesting, but you may not hear, but it's there in the score, is that he uses two different key signatures. For those who don't know music, I'll just say that the key signature is what defines the tonality harmonically of a piece. And in this particular movement, he uses some instruments playing in B flat major and some playing in A major. This reflects what I was talking about before. B flat major works very well there, and E that he goes to is the fifth degree of A major. So using B flat and A major is interesting, makes it difficult visually to look at because you're seeing things in different key signatures, but I can't think of too many other pieces, certainly this far back in Western music history, that do this, and I think it's quite beautiful and effective. The fourth movement is probably the most popular in terms of its use in concerts. It's Jupiter, the bringer of jollity. It starts with extreme exuberance and pretty much maintains it all the way throughout. It has two basic sections. The first one begins with this ostinato, again, in the strings. Underneath that, you have the horns. It's a marvelous start. It grabs the audience. It sets up the feeling of joy that he'll maintain throughout this movement. He presents shortly thereafter a motive in the horns that will become an important motive in this movement. It's made up of fourths. And you're going to have it again throughout this movement. It gives us a motive that he'll revisit quite often. In the middle of this movement, he changes course, and suddenly we're no longer in 2/4, yin-ta-ta, 1, 2, 1, 2, but he goes into 3, and it's, again, a very famous melody. Like we've had in the previous movements, he'll repeat this melody again and again and again, each time adding new layers, new textures, new orchestral instruments that will join in, new sounds, and build in excitement as well. Eventually, we'll also build in tempo, and we'll come back to our original section. So that's the first part of this piece. Midway through, again, he changes course, and now we have what I can best explain as a British hymn. This is where the music, it's unmistakably Holst, and this is how that goes. It's stately, it's majestic, it's somber, but it still has a sense of joy and delight and triumph. This itself will repeat several times and build in energy. And then it will return with the return of the melody in fourth, which will be handed off among the various woodwind and brass instruments, and it builds towards a tremendous finish, coming back to our, which will return in a much faster tempo as it drives us towards the end of this marvelous movement. The fifth movement is Saturn, the bringer of old age. This one begins mysteriously, and in fact, it maintains a sense of mystery throughout. It's a slow movement, in fact, almost ponderously slow, and begins with the melody in the double basses, the lowest of the string instruments. This is what this opening sounds like. The accompaniment is made up of they're chords that are made up of primarily the tritone. We talked about that before, the two farthest notes apart. It's a very strange pairing of notes. But when you add on the bottom the third, it really does sound weird. And these just alternate slowly back and forth. And here's the melody. So this sets the mood for this piece, and this long opening section creates the sense of timelessness as well. Old age, long life, everything moves much slower. Eventually the trombones will come in as a chorale, playing a very beautiful melody. And out of this come, I wouldn't say explosions, but much stronger, ponderous chords. that's the opening section of this movement. The second section, again, is extremely slow and features chords in the flute section. Now, what I didn't mention, this is a piece that's written for extremely large orchestra. Your normal Beethoven symphony would have 2 flutes. This orchestra has 3 flutes, a piccolo, and a bass flute, actually an alto flute, a larger flute that has a lower pitch. A Beethoven symphony would have 2 oboes. This has 3 oboes, an English horn, which is an alto oboe, and a bass oboe, which is a long instrument, the largest of the oboe section. It has 3 clarinets, an E-flat clarinet, the high-pitched squeaky clarinet, and the bass clarinet. It has 5 bassoons, 4 bassoons and a contrabassoon. It has extremely large numbers of brass instruments. It has 2 tubas, one tenor tuba or euphonium, and 1 bass tuba. It has 2 harps. It has a large percussion section and a very large string section. So the reason why I bring this up here is he uses the large number of homogeneous instruments. In this case, you have 4 flutes, and he's able to create chords with the 4 flutes that just sound like flutes rather than a combination of flutes and oboes or flutes and clarinets. What am I doing? Is that right? It's very eerie. And so on. And you'll have different choral groups of the various sections of the orchestra joining in, adding new timbres and new sounds. It will build up to another climax. And the ending section of this movement is extremely serene. I mean, I don't know if he's getting into philosophical ideas about the end of life and about growing old, but certainly the end of the piece is one of calm. It's in a major key after all of these very strange tritone-based chords and minor chords. It ends in quite a lovely way. Let's see. Capturing it well, but it is quite lovely. The harps are playing fast arpeggios. It really ends in a sensational way, which leads us into the 6th movement, which is Uranus the Magician. This is, again, a quicker movement, but one that has real a jocular sense to it, but still maintains a little bit of a sense of mystery. It begins with powerful brass notes. Answered by the tuba and the timpani. Interesting. Then out of that comes this dance-like accompaniment figure from the bassoons. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, almost like a jig. And this will go on for a while. We'll get our opening notes from the low brasses again every so often. And then a beautiful melody will emerge. Again, in the bassoons. Now, the bassoons traditionally are kind of the jokers of the orchestra, and so we're somewhat programmed to think, oh, this is jocular music when the bassoons play. And I think that's done intentionally by Holst in this piece. I'm not going to play too much more of this wonderful movement, but there is a section that comes in the middle after another explosion of the opening low notes in the low brass. Suddenly the dance becomes a little bit more riotous and almost exploding in energy. And out of that will be another theme that emerges. And this will be the bulk of the remainder of this movement until it crashes together. This actually reminds me a little bit of the music from The Sorcerer's Apprentice. In a similar sense, you have music that begins dance-like when it's kind of good fun, and then things get out of control, the experiment goes awry, and things get crazy and frenetic and extremely destructively powerful. In a similar sense, this same thing happens in the Uranus movement. The final movement of the piece is the most mysterious. This is Neptune the Mystic. Appropriately, it's mystical music. This is, again, returning to 5. The first movement, Mars, was in 5/4. This movement is also in 5/4. But whereas Mars was a driven 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is extremely slow and quiet. Extremely slow. And he maintains this almost unmoving sense throughout this entire last movements. Things will become more active. You'll have moving chords that come through the orchestra. He's juxtaposing harmonically chords that don't really go together. In this case, E minor and G sharp minor, which are fairly far apart from each other in terms of a harmonic distance. You'll again get use of the celesta, that bell-like keyboard in this movement, and you'll have a lot of use of the harp to create beautiful mystical textures underneath. But the most distinct part of this piece, and the most distinctive part of this piece, is the entrance of female voices. Now, for the purposes of our performance, we will be using synthesized voices, but they will be off in the distance, off stage. And it's interesting that he uses voices. Now, he's not the first composer to do this. Ravel uses voices in Daphnis and Chloe. There are voices in a number of pieces. The Polyvetzian Dances has voices. The 1812 Overture has voices in them. But the use of voices, just singing on ah, to create an orchestral texture is something that's fairly new to compositional world of this time. And the way that Holst uses it in particular to bring this piece to a close is really unique and beautiful. And I think it's going to be a wonderful performance. It's a great way to end our season with this extremely big piece. But what I love particularly about the planets is not just its hugeness. I think that what's particularly wonderful about it is that each movement is unique to itself. He's completely consistent within each movement in maintaining the characteristics that he wants to portray, so that you have almost a sense of a suite of character pieces. And I think it's a very engaging piece, extremely beautiful in its conception and its orchestration. His daughter once said that Holst was uncomfortable with the idea of writing a symphony, meaning a piece that had to somehow take you over a linear journey from beginning to end. And so this was kind of his way of dealing with writing a larger orchestral piece where he didn't have to do that, but rather he was able to write individual pieces that somehow go well together and flow beautifully from one to the next, but each one its own self-contained character piece. Again, these concerts are going to be on April 13th and 14th. The 13th, Saturday night at 7:30, and Sunday the 14th at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Performing Arts Center at Greenwich High School. I hope you'll come join us. It's incredibly wonderful music. And the one thing that I didn't talk at all about is that while we are performing the planets, there will be beautiful video presentation. We did this when I performed it last year in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's extremely wonderful, and the artistic impact of having this beautiful video with the beautiful audio, I think, is quite unique. So come enjoy wonderful music that's out of this world with the Greenwich Symphony Orchestra. Hope to see you there.